Hello, how are you? I hope you're well. It's been a big week and it's only Wednesday. I was feeling really overwhelmed yesterday. Sorry, I was trying to find the right word. Not even overwhelmed, just like I'd done a hang of a lot of stuff yesterday. So I sat down and wrote a list of the things I'd done, and it was a big list. For someone who doesn't usually get lots done, they get one or two things done, but they do them well most of the time. Yeah, it was a lot of stuff. No wonder I was feeling a little bit wasted yesterday. Anyway, we're here. We are ready to read. Sorry, I'm wiggling around because I'm trying to get my chair to where the wheels are not going to try and scoop me backwards. Yes, because that happens. And just make sure that the sound is down on my phone because we don't need that interruption. And I shall unlock my iPad. Hi, if you're new here, sorry, I better explain who I am. Hi, I'm Jev. I read old-fashioned children's stories. I currently am reading them off my first generation iPad mini, which is really old. It's ancient for an iPad mini. So old that you can't do updates on it anymore or anything like that. But thankfully, I can still go online and get public domain books from Project Gutenberg and read them because the apps that are built into it rather than the installable apps still work. So that's wonderful. I read old-fashioned stories because they're a great bit of escapism. They talk about a world that's completely different to the world that we're in now, and sometimes we just need that. They're also really good for stretching your imagination and helping you to perceive the world differently to how you currently do. Sometimes we just need that. So that's a big part of it. And if you see me looking sideways like this, it's because I'm still haven't transitioned onto my replacement computer, which is also a second-hand one, but it is much more capable than the one I'm currently using. But the one I'm currently using can't run two monitors so that I can see what's going on in the background. So at the moment I have the second computer running. Yes, both of them are second-hand. The second computer running and showing me what's going on, the things I need to check up on. So lurkers are very definitely welcome. Don't have an issue with people not interacting in the chat. If you want to, that's great. I tend to not specifically interact with the chat except for the beginning and the end of a stream session. And if we've got a book with shorter chapters and there's a chapter break, then yes, I will comment on things that are written in the chat. But if you're listening and I appear not sure about something, or you want to contribute something that's information to do with the story that we're reading or the location of it or anything that you think is particularly, well, partly even, not even specifically relevant, feel free to put it into the chat box, and when it's appropriate in the reading, or even if I just get distracted and notice it, I'll read it out so that those who are watching on YouTube who won't have the benefit of having the Twitch chat system there can actually find out a little bit of extra information. Sometimes there are words which, most of the time I'm pretty good with old words. Every now and then there'll be one I'm not so sure of, and so I'll ask if anyone actually has the time to look it up, give me a dictionary definition or an online definition for it, and they'll put it into the chat, and then I'll read that out just to make it easier for us all to understand. So there you go. That's it. If you are happy for me to say hi to you and you're here lurking, you're most welcome to hit the exclamation mark, which is the stick with a dot under it in case you're not sure, and then write the word lurk immediately after it, no spaces, L-U-R-K, exclamation mark lurk. And then there'll be a chat message that says thank you for lurking or something like that, so that other people know it's okay too. Some people don't like to have their presence acknowledged when they're lurking. Others don't mind at all, but they're just letting me know that they're not going to be actively participating in the chat. So there you go. The other thing is, I'm quite happy for you to be listening to music or doing housework, studying, doing some other sort of work, and you just want some company, and so therefore you're listening to me while you're doing whatever as your way of having some company, and that's fine by me. We do not have a test at the end of the session to find out if you were listening properly or anything like that. We might joke about it, but we don't actually do any of those things. So how about we read? Good idea. Yeah, here we go. We are reading The Phoenix and the Carpet by E. Nesbit. And I forgot, you didn't tell me. My tips are, make sure you have some water to drink and something to snack on and somewhere comfortable to sit. Unless, of course, you have to do housework or something like that where you can't just sit comfortably. Water is great to keep your brain working well and to keep your body hydrated. They both do better with making sure you have enough water to drink. You can have other things to drink as well. I have my homemade iced coffee, which is basically coffee from the machine topped up with a whole lot of cold milk. I don't drink milk on its own, but when it's in coffee like that, it's very nice. So yeah, those are the only other tips I have for you. So let's get on with reading. The Phoenix and the Carpet by E. Nesbit, Chapter 9, The Burglars' Braid. We had a burglar in the last chapter. I wonder if it's anything to do with that burglar. How about we find out? The morning after the adventure of the Persian cats, the muskrats, the common cow, and the uncommon burglar, all the children slept till it was 10 o'clock. And then it was only Cyril who woke, but he attended to the others so that by 10:30 everyone was ready to help to get breakfast. It was shivery cold and there was but little in the house that was really worth eating. Just an aside here to explain the story for those who have forgotten or are not familiar with it. The children are in the house on their own at the moment because they're meant to be staying with an aunt somewhere. There was a big mix-up, so they ended up coming home from the train station that they had been at across the city. And so because they were meant to be away, their parents are already away somewhere else, because the children are meant to be away, the servants, the cook and the housekeeper, the maid, are actually having some time off. So there's nobody at the house except for the children because they turned up at home anyway, which is how they ended up with the burglar there. Kind of. So we'll carry on with reading and find out how the children cope with looking after themselves, because that was not a very commonly done thing amongst middle-class English London children at the time. It was shivery cold and there was but little in the house that was really worth eating. Robert had arranged a thoughtful little surprise for the absent servants. He had made a neat and delightful booby trap over the kitchen door, and as soon as they heard the front door click open and knew the servants had come back, all 4 children hid in the cupboard under the stairs and listened with delight to the entrance, the tumble, the splash, the scuffle, and the remarks of the servants. They heard the cook say it was a judgment on them for leaving the place to itself. She seemed to think that a booby trap was a kind of plant that was quite likely to grow all by itself in a dwelling that was left shut up. But the housemaid, more acute, judged that someone must have been in the house. A view confirmed by the sight of the breakfast things on the nursery table. The cupboard under the stairs was very tight and paraffin-y. Kerosene is lamp oil. Paraffin is the English name for lamp oil. In New Zealand, paraffin refers to a type of wax, which is possibly made from the same original substance. I don't know. Doesn't really matter. So just interpreting for different languages, different English languages. So the cupboard smells rather of paraffin from that. That's probably where they store the lamps or the lamp oil. Was very tight and paraffin-y, however, and a silent struggle for a place on top ended with the door bursting open and discharging Jane, the youngest, who rolled like a football to the feet of the servants. The youngest of the 4, there is a younger child again, who we don't have a lot to do with in this book. They're more involved with the previous book, quite a lot younger. Now, said Cyril firmly when the cook's hysterics had become quieter and the housemaid had had time to say what she thought of them, don't you begin jawing us. We aren't going to stand it. We know too much. You'll please make an extra special treacly rolly for dinner, and we'll have a tinned tongue. Tinned tongue was a type of meat that comes in a can, and it's used in certain meals, and some people particularly like it. Some of us don't. We've had it. We don't. Treacle roly is treacle roly-poly pudding. It's a pudding made probably in a pudding basin or a pudding cloth, and it uses treacle as one of the main flavours. And it's probably boiled to make it baked right through. Very old-fashioned, but comfort food for children. I dare say, said the housemaid, indignant, still in her outdoor things and with her hat very much on one side. Don't you come a-threatening me, Master Cyril, because I won't stand it, so I tell you. You tell your ma and us being out. Much I care. She'll be sorry for me when she hears about my great-aunt by marriage as brought me up from a child and was a mother to me. She sent for me, she did. She wasn't expected to last the night from the spasms going to her legs, and cook was that kind and careful she wouldn't let me go alone. So, don't, said Anthea in real distress. You know where liars go to, Eliza. At least, if you don't. Liars indeed, said Eliza. I won't demean myself talking to you. How's Mrs. Wigson? Said Robert. And did you keep it up last night? The mouth of the housemaid fell open. Mrs. Wigson, that was referenced by the burglar that they had last night. Did you doss with Maria or Emily? Asked Cyril. How did Mrs. Prosser enjoy herself? Asked Jane. Forbear, said Cyril. They've had enough. Whether we tell or not depends on your later life, he went on, addressing the servants. If you are decent to us, we'll be decent to you. You'd better make that treacle rolly, and if I were you, Eliza, I'd do a little housework and cleaning, just for a change. She tends to do as little as she can get away with. The servants gave in once and for all. There's nothing like firmness, said Cyril, when the breakfast things were cleared away and the children were alone in the nursery. People are always talking of difficulties with servants. It's quite simple when you know the way. We can do what we like now and they won't peach. I think we've broken their proud spirit. Let's go somewhere by carpet. Oh dear, I hope they're not going to get into trouble with the servants. They might have to be saved by them. I wouldn't if I were you, said the phoenix, yawning as it swooped down from its roost on the curtain pole. I've given you 1 or 2 hints, but now concealment is at an end, and I see I must speak out. It perched on the back of a chair and swayed to and fro, like a parrot on a swing. What's the matter now? Said Anthea. She was not quite so gentle as usual because she was still weary from the excitement of last night's cats. I'm tired of things happening. I shan't go anywhere on the carpet. I'm going to darn my stockings. Not really the sort of thing that most people do to keep themselves occupied, but there you go. Darn, said the phoenix, darn, from those young lips these strange expressions. He's referring to the word darn. Mend, then, said Anthea, with a needle and wool. The phoenix opened and shut its wings thoughtfully. Your stockings, it said, are much less important than they now appear to you, but the carpet. Look at the bare, worn patches. Look at the great rent at yonder corner from when the cow was tied to it. The carpet has been your faithful friend, your willing servant. How have you requited its devoted service? Dear Phoenix, and Anthea urged, don't talk in that horrid lecturing tone. You make me feel as if I'd done something wrong. And really it is a wishing carpet and we haven't done anything else to it. Only wishes. Only wishes, repeated the phoenix, ruffling its neck feathers angrily. And what sort of wishes? Wishing people to be in a good temper, for instance? What carpet did you ever hear of that had such a wish asked of it? But this noble fabric on which you trample so recklessly, everyone removed its boots from the carpet and stood on the linoleum, this carpet never flinched. It did what you asked, but the wear and tear must have been awful. And then last night, I don't blame you about the cats and rats, for those were its choice. But what carpet could stand a heavy cow hanging onto it at one corner? I should think the cats and rats were worse, said Robert. Look at all their claws. Yes, said the bird, 11,940 of them. I dare say you noticed. I should be surprised if these had not left their mark. Good gracious, said Jane, sitting down suddenly on the floor and patting the edge of the carpet softly. Do you mean it's wearing out? Its life with you has not been a luxurious one, said the phoenix. French mud twice, sand of sunny shores twice, soaking in southern seas once, India once, goodness knows where in Persia once, Muskratland once, and once wherever the cow came from. Hold your carpet up to the light, and with cautious tenderness, if you please. With cautious tenderness, the boys held the carpet up to the light. The girls looked, and a shiver of regret ran through them as they saw how those 11,940 claws had run through the carpet. It was full of little holes. There were some large ones and more than one thin place. Here we have a picture. I found it. It was full of little holes. They're looking at the carpet and realizing that it is getting rather worn out, and having animals like cats and rats standing on it with their sharp claws to hold on is not helping it either. Okay, we'll carry on reading. There were some large ones and more than one thin place. At one corner, a strip of it was torn and hung forlornly. We must mend it, said Anthea. Never mind about my stockings. I can sew them in lumps with sewing cotton if there's no time to do them properly. I know it's awful, and no girl would who respected herself and all that, but poor dear carpet's more important than my silly stockings. Let's go out now this very minute. So out they all went and bought wool to mend the carpet. But there was no shop in Camden Town where you can buy wishing wool. No, nor in Kentish Town either. However, ordinary Scotch heather mixture, fingering, seemed good enough. Heather mixture is usually to do with the colour of it. Fingering is probably the weight and the type of twist it has. And this they bought, and all that day Jane and Anthea darned and darned and darned. The boys went out for a walk in the afternoon, and the gentle phoenix paced up and down the table, for exercise as it said, and talked to the industrious girls about their carpet. The boys aren't doing it because they've never been taught to sew, I would imagine, because back in those days, boys didn't learn those things. The book is set in the Edwardian period, which is just after the Victorian period, where very much girls have certain roles and boys have certain other roles. Thankfully, these boys at least are a little bit more capable when it comes to getting some food together and doing things like dishes, because traditionally even that sort of thing was not what boys did. Sorry, carrying on. And talked to the industrious girls about their carpet. It is not an ordinary, ignorant, innocent carpet from Kidderminster, it said, because Kidderminster is a place that makes carpets. Obviously not wishing carpets. It is a carpet with a past, a Persian past. Do you know that in happier years, when that carpet was the property of caliphs, viziers, kings and sultans, it lay on a floor? I thought the floor was the proper home of a carpet, Jane interrupted. Not of a magic carpet, said the phoenix. Why, if it had been allowed to lie about on floors, there wouldn't have been much of it left now. Oh, sorry, it never lay on a floor. I really must not miss the words. It changes the meaning. Not of a magic carpet, said the phoenix. Why, if it had been allowed to lie about on floors, there wouldn't be much of it left now. No, indeed, it has lived in chests of cedar wood, inlaid with pearl and ivory. Cedar wood stops the moths getting in, because moths eat wool, and that would have wrecked the carpet very quickly. wrapped in priceless tissues of cloth of gold, embroidered with gems of fabulous value, the wrapper, to keep it safe. It has reposed in the sandalwood caskets of princesses and the rose attar-scented treasure houses of kings. All of those have a wonderful set of fragrances. Sandalwood, rose of attar. They all have strong, pleasant smells, but here's a tip for you for around the house. The smell disguises the smell of wool so that the moths can't find it to eat it. There you go. In rose attar scented treasure houses of kings, never has anyone degraded it by walking on it, except in the way of business, when wishes were required, and then they always took off their shoes. And you... Oh, don't, said Jane, very near tears. You know you'd never have been hatched at all if it hadn't been for Mother wanting a carpet for us to walk on. You needn't have walked so much or so hard, said the bird. But come, dry that crystal tear, and I will relate to you the story of the Princess Zulika, the Prince of Asia, and the magic carpet. Relate away, said Anthea. Please do. The Prince Zulika, fairest of royal ladies, began the bird, had in her cradle been the subject of several enchantments. Her grandmother had been in her day, but what in her day Zulika's grandmother had been was destined never to be revealed, for Cyril and Robert suddenly burst into the room, and on each brow were traces of deep emotion. On Cyril's pale brow stood beads of agitation and perspiration, and on the scarlet brow of Robert was a large black smear. Forehead. What ails ye both? Asked the phoenix, and it added tartly that storytelling was quite impossible if people would come interrupting like that. Oh, do shut up for any sake, said Cyril, sinking into a chair. Robert smoothed the ruffled golden feathers, adding kindly, Squirrel doesn't mean to be a beast. It's only that the most awful thing has happened, and stories don't seem to matter so much. Don't be cross. You won't be when you've heard what's happened. Well, what has happened? Said the bird, still rather crossly. And Anthea and Jane paused with long needles poised in the air, and long needlefuls of Scotch heather mixture fingering wool drooping from them. The most awful thing you can possibly think of, said Cyril. That nice chap, our own burglar. The police have got him on suspicion of stolen cats. That's what his brother's missus told me. Oh, begin at the beginning, cried Anthea impatiently. Well then, we went out and down by where the undertaker's is, with the china flowers in the window, you know. There was a crowd, and of course we went to have a squint, and it was two bobbies, that's policemen, and our burglar between them, and he was being dragged along, and he said, I tell you, them cats was give me. I got 'em in exchange for me milking a cow in a basement parlour up Camden Town way. And people laughed. Beasts! Because nobody believed a story like that. And then one of the policemen said perhaps he could give the name and address of the cow, and he said no, he couldn't, but he could take them there if they'd only leave go of his coat collar and give him a chance to get his breath. And the policeman said he could tell all that to the magistrate in the morning. He didn't see us, and so we came away. Oh, Cyril, how could you? Said Anthea. Don't be a pudding head, Cyril advised. A fat lot of good it would have done if we'd let him see us. No one would have believed a word we said. They'd have thought we were kidding. We did better than let him see us. We asked a boy where he lived, and he told us, and we went there, and it's a little greengrocer's shop, and we bought some Brazil nuts. Here they are. The girls waved away the Brazil nuts with loathing and contempt. They wanted to know what was happening. We had to buy something, and while we were making up our minds what to buy, we heard his brother's missus talking. She said when he came home with all them meowlers, she thought there was more in it than met the eye. But he would go out this morning with the two likeliest of 'em, one under each arm. She said he sent her out to buy blue ribbon to put round their beastly necks, and she said if he got 3 months hard, it was her dying word that he'd got the blue ribbon to thank for it, that, and his own silly thieving ways. taking cats that anybody would know he couldn't have come by in the way of business, instead of things that wouldn't have been much missed, which Lord knows there are plenty such, and— "Oh, stop!" cried Jane, and indeed it was time, for Cyril seemed like a clock that had been wound up and could not help going on. "Where is he now?" Sorry. Sorry, tickle at the back of my nose. I'll leave my water bottle open so it's not so squeaky. "At the police station," said Robert, for Cyril was out of breath. "The boy told us they'd put him in the cells and would bring him up before the beak," that's the magistrate, "in the morning. I thought it was a jolly lark last night, getting him to take the cats. But now, the end of a lark," said the Phoenix, "is the beak." Because a lark is also a bird, and a bird has a beak at one end. So the Phoenix is taking it literally. "Let's go to him," cried both the girls, jumping up. "Let's go and tell the truth. They must believe us." "They can't," said Cyril. "Just think, if anyone came to you with such a tale, you wouldn't believe it, however much you tried. We should only mix things up worse for him." "There must be something we could do," said Jane, sniffing very much. "My own dear pet burglar. I can't help it. And he was so nice, the way he talked about his father and how he was going to be so extra honest. Dear Phoenix, you must be able to help us. You're so good and kind and pretty and clever. Do tell us what to do," said Jane. The Phoenix rubbed its beak thoughtfully with its claw. "You might rescue him," it said, "and conceal him here till the law's supporters had forgotten about him." "That would be ages and ages," said Cyril, "and we couldn't conceal him here. Father might come home at any moment, and if he found the burglar here, he wouldn't believe the true truth any more than the police would. That's the worst of the truth. Nobody ever believes it. Couldn't we take him somewhere else?" Sorry, I'm just going to check to see if I have another picture coming up. Probably. I just can't remember what. And I shall get that lined up so it's ready to look at. Oh dear, the neighbour's now going to mow the lawn. Ah well, I hope you can still hear me above the lawnmower. Don't know if it's actually coming through for you or not, but it is for me. I'm just going to find these pictures so I can see. I mean, I've put one up there to show you in a minute, but I need to see which ones they actually are, because it would make it a lot easier if I know beforehand which ones they are. Right, okay, we're ready to go. "Couldn't we take him somewhere else?" said Cyril. Jane clapped her hands. "The sunny southern shore," she cried, "where the cook is being queen." In the beginning of the book, their existing cook needed to have a break and go somewhere else, and so the carpet ended up taking her to a sunny southern shore, and she's the queen there on the coast now, which is why they have their current cook instead. He and she would be company for each other. And really the idea did not seem bad, if only he would consent to go. So, all talking at once, the children arranged to wait till evening and then to seek the dare burglar in his lonely cell. Meantime, Jane and Anthea darned away as hard as they could to make the carpet as strong as possible. We'll see what happens. I wonder if having other wool in it's going to make a difference to how strong it is and how well it complies with wishes. For all felt how terrible it would be if the precious burglar, while being carried to the sunny southern shore, were to tumble through a hole in the carpet and be lost forever in the sunny southern sea. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit itchy. It's Still a bit too warm here, and I get itchy very easily. Not a rash or anything, it's just my skin decides it's going to be itchy because something's touching it. The servants were tired after Mrs. Wigson's party, so everyone went to bed early, and when the Phoenix reported that both servants were snoring in a heartfelt and candid manner, the children got up. They had never undressed. Just putting their nightgowns on over their things had been enough to deceive Eliza when she came to turn out the gas, so they were ready for anything, and they stood on the carpet and said, "I wish we were in our burglar's lonely cell," and instantly they were. I think everyone had expected the cell to be the deepest dungeon below the castle moat. I am sure no one had doubted that the burglar, chained by heavy fetters to a ring in a damp stone wall, would be tossing uneasily on a bed of straw with a pitcher of water and a mouldering crust untasted beside him. Robert, remembering the underground passage and the treasure, had brought a candle and matches. That was from one of their other adventures. But these were not needed. The cell was a little whitewashed room about 12 feet long and 6 feet wide. On one side of it was a sort of shelf, sloping a little towards the wall. On this were 2 rugs, striped blue and yellow, and a waterproof pillow. Rolled in the rugs and with his head on the pillow lay the burglar, fast asleep. He had had his tea, though this the children did not know. It had come from the coffee shop round the corner in very thick crockery. The scene was plainly revealed by the light of a gas lamp in the passage outside, which shone into the cell through a pane of thick glass over the door. "I shall gag him," said Cyril, "and Robert will hold him down. Anthea and Jane and the Phoenix can whisper soft nothings to him while he gradually awakes." This plan did not have the success it deserved, because the burglar, curiously enough, was much stronger, even in his sleep, than Robert and Cyril, and at the first touch of their hands he leapt up and shouted out something very loud indeed. Instantly steps were heard outside. Anthea threw her arms round the burglar and whispered, "It's us! It's the ones that gave you the cats! We've come to save you, only don't let on we're here. Can't we hide somewhere?" Heavy boots sounded on the flagstones outside, and a firm voice shouted, "Here, you! Stop that row, will you?" "All right, governor," replied the burglar, still with Anthea's arms round him. "I was only a-talking in my sleep. No offence." It was an awful moment. Would the boots and the voice come in? Yes? No? The voice said, "Well, stow it, will ya?" And the boots went heavily away along the passage and up some sounding stone stairs. "Now then," whispered Anthea. "How the blue Moses did you get in?" asked the burglar in a hoarse whisper of amazement. "On the carpet?" said Jane, truly. "Stow that," said the burglar. "One on you and I could have swallowed. But 4 and a yellow fowl." "Look here," said Cyril sternly, "you wouldn't have believed anyone if they'd told you beforehand about your finding a cow and all those cats in our nursery." "That I wouldn't," said the burglar with whispered fervour. "So help me Bob, I wouldn't." "Well then," Cyril went on, ignoring this appeal to his brother, which actually wasn't, it's just a turn of phrase. "Just try to believe what we tell you and act accordingly. It can't do you any harm, you know," he went on in hoarse whispered earnestness. "You can't be very much worse off than you are now, you know. But if you'll just trust to us, we'll get you out of this right enough. No one saw us come in. The question is, where would you like to go?" "I'd like to go to Boulogne," was the instant reply of the burglar. "I've always wanted to go on that there trip, but I'd never had the ready at the right time of year." Ready, money. "Boulogne is a town like London," said Cyril, with well-meaning but inaccurate. "How could you get a living there?" The burglar scratched his head in deep doubt. "It's hard to get an honest living anywheres nowadays," he said, and his voice was sad. "Yes, isn't it?" said Jane sympathetically. "But how about a sunny southern shore, where there's nothing to do at all unless you want to?" "That's my billet, miss," replied the burglar. "I never did care about work, not like some people, always fussing about." "Did you never like any sort of work?" said Anthea severely. "Lor' lummy, yes," he answered. "Gardening was my hobby, so it was, but father died afore he could bind me to a nurseryman, And that means get him an apprenticeship with someone who would actually take him on as a trainee gardener. "We'll take you to the sunny southern shore," said Jane. "You've no idea what the flowers are like." "Our old cook's there," said Anthea. "She's queen." "Oh, chuck it," the burglar whispered, clutching at his head with both hands. "I knowed the first minute I seen them cats and that cow that as was a judgment on me. I don't know now whether I'm a-standing on my head or my boots. So help me I don't. If you can get me out, get me. And if you can't, get along with you for goodness sake and give me a chance to think about what's most likely to go down with the beak in the morning." "Come on to the carpet then," said Anthea, gently shoving. The others quietly pulled, and the moment the feet of the burglar were planted on the carpet, Anthea wished, "I wish we were all on the sunny southern shore where Cook is." And instantly they were. There was the rainbow sands, There were the rainbow sands, the tropic glories of leaf and flower, and there, of course, was the cook, crowned with white flowers, and with all the wrinkles of crossness and tiredness and hard work wiped out of her face. "Why, Cook, you're quite pretty," Anthea said as soon as she had got her breath after the tumble-rush whirl of the carpet. The burglar stood, rubbing his eyes in the brilliant tropic sunlight, and gazing wildly round him on the vivid hues of the tropic land. "Penny plain and tuppence coloured," he exclaimed pensively, "and well worth any tuppence, however hard earned." The cook was seated on a grassy mound, with her court of copper-coloured savages around her. The burglar pointed a grimy finger at these. "Are they tame?" he asked anxiously. "Do they bite or scratch or do anything with your poisoned arrows or oyster shells or that?" No experience whatsoever of anyone from another culture. So, with that in mind, not quite such an unusual question. "Don't you be so timid," said the cook. "Looky here, this here's only a dream, what you've come into, and as it's only a dream, there's no nonsense about what a young lady like me ought to say or not, so I'll say you're the best-looking fella I've seen this many a day, and the dream goes on and on, seemingly as long as you behaves. The things what you has to eat and drink taste just as good as real ones, and—" "Look here," said the burglar, "I've come here straight out of the police station. These here kids tell you it ain't no blame of mine." "Well, you were a burglar, you know," said the truthful Anthea gently. So Cook still thinks it's a dream, and she still thinks that if she behaves herself well, she'll stay there. She doesn't realise she's actually there. Anyway, it works. "Only because I was druv to it by dishonest blokes as well, you knows, miss," rejoined the criminal. "Blowed if this ain't the hottest January as I've known for years." He's in the tropics. It's nothing like January in London. London in January is in the middle of winter, and it's cold and dreary and often very grey and a bit drizzly and ick. Not all of winter is like that over in England, but for some reason January feels like it is, and it's usually worse when you're in the city. If you're living out in the country, the weather doesn't seem as bad. You still get bad weather, but because you've got lovely surroundings, you've got green fields and trees in the woods that are across the paddock and all this sort of stuff and animals, it doesn't feel as grey and as depressing as what it does if you're living in the city, because you don't have any of those things to see to pick your spirits up. Anyway, "Wouldn't you like a bath?" asked the Queen, "and some white clothes like me?" "I should only look at a juggins in him, miss, thanking you all the same," was the reply. "But a bath I couldn't resist, and my shirt was only clean on week before last." Cyril and Robert led him to a rocky pool where he bathed luxuriously. Then, in shirt and trousers, he sat on the sand and spoke. Just an aside to do with the tropics. Yes, the water it's almost like bath water. It's warm enough to sit in without worrying about feeling too cold or anything like that. Very, very pleasant. Sorry, my nose. Something is itching my nose. Possibly a little bit of fluff from the cat. But I haven't seen him for a couple of hours, so it shouldn't be. Anyway, doesn't matter. Then in shirt and trousers he sat on the sand and spoke. That cook or queen or whatever you call her with the white bouquet on her head, she's my sort. Wonder if she'd keep company. I should ask her. I was always a quick hitter, the man went on. It's a word and a blow with me. I will. Blow, hit. So he's wondering if she'd consider going out with him, if she'd keep company. In shirt and trousers and crowned with a scented flowery wreath which Cyril hastily wove as they returned to the court of the Queen, the burglar stood before the cook and spoke. Look here, miss, he said, you and me being all forlorn like, both on us in this here dream or whatever you calls it, I'd like to tell you straight as I likes your looks. The cook smiled and looked down bashfully. I'm a single man, what you might call a bachelor door. I'm mild in my habits, which these kids will tell you the same, and I'd like to have the pleasure of walking out with you next Sunday. Law, said the Queen Cook, how sudden you are, mister. Walking out means you're going to be married, said Anthea. Why not get married and have done with it? I would. I don't mind if I do, said the burglar, but the cook said, no, miss, not me, not even in a dream. I don't say anything again the young chap's looks, but I always swore I'd be married in church, if at all, and anyway I don't believe these here savages would know how to keep a registering office, even if I was to show them. No, mister, thank you kindly. If you can't bring a clergyman into the dream, I'll live and die like what I am. Will you marry her if we get a clergyman? Asked the matchmaking Anthea. I'm agreeable, miss, said he, pulling his wreath straight. How's this here bouquet do tickle a chap's ears, to be sure. It's tickling his ears, sorry. So very hurriedly the carpet was spread out and instructed to fetch a clergyman. Oh dear, this is wish number 3. There's only 3 in a day. 1 to get in the cell, 1 to get to where the cook is, and 1 to get the clergyman. They're going to get stuck here. Oh no, I don't think they've thought of that. And instructed to fetch a clergyman. The instructions were written on the inside of Cyril's cap with a piece of billiard chalk Robert had got from the marker at the hotel at Lyndhurst, because they didn't have any paper or pencils with them. The carpet disappeared, and more quickly than you would have thought it possible, came back, bearing on its bosom the Reverend Septimus Blenkinsop. The Reverend Septimus was rather a nice young man, but very much mazed and muddled, because when he saw a strange carpet laid out at his feet in his own study, he naturally walked on it to examine it more closely. And he happened to stand on one of the thin places that Jane and Anthea had darned, so that he was half on wishing carpet and half on plain Scotch heather mixture fingering, which had no magic properties at all. The effect of this was that he was only half there, so that the children could just see through him as though he had been a ghost. And as for him, he saw the sunny southern shore, the cook and the burglar and the children quite plainly, but through them all he saw quite plainly also his study at home, with the books and the pictures and the marble clock that had been presented to him when he left his last situation. Oh dear, I'm just going to see if there's an effect I can show you that will help you to imagine this. Opacity, here we go. So, actually I should see if there's another picture that's more relevant coming up. No, there isn't. So we'll go with this. And I'll change the opacity of this picture so you can get an impression of what it's like for the clergyman. That should show. Why is that not doing it? No, it's not doing it. That is meant to make that picture so that you can half see through it. And it's not doing it at all, is it? No. Oh well. We'll just have to pretend. I can do it on my computer with other things where you have two pictures over the top of each other and you can see one picture through the other. Not like between my fingers, but through my fingers. There you go. And that's what it's like for him at the moment, because he's half standing on magic carpet and half on normal carpet because of where the girls have been darning it. I did wonder if something was going to happen with having some wool in it that is not magic carpet wool. Oh well, we'll carry on. So the clergyman, he seemed to himself to be in a sort of insane fit, so that it did not matter what he did. He's thinking that there's something weird going on with his brain, which is why he's seeing things like this, instead of it just being a normal scene in his study. And so it doesn't matter what he did. And he married the burglar to the cook, because it didn't matter, because it's just some weird thing that's going on with his brain. The cook said that she would rather have had a solider kind of clergyman, a solider kind of clergyman, one that you couldn't see through so plain, but perhaps this was real enough for a dream. And of course the clergyman, though misty, was really real and able to marry people, and he did. When the ceremony was over, the clergyman wandered about the island, collecting botanical specimens, for he was a great botanist, and the ruling passion was strong, even in an insane fit. There was a splendid wedding feast. Can you fancy Jane and Anthea and Robert and Cyril dancing merrily in a ring, hand in hand with copper-coloured savages, round the happy couple, the queen cook and the burglar consort? There were more flowers gathered and thrown than you have ever even dreamed of, and before the children took carpet for home, the now married and settled burglar made a speech. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "and savages of both kinds, only I know you can't understand what I'm a-saying of, but we'll let that pass. If this is a dream, I'm on. If it ain't, I'm oner than ever. If it's betwixt and between, well, I'm honest and I can't say more. I don't want no more London society. I got someone to put my arm round of, and I got the whole lot of this here island for my allotment. And if I don't grow some broccoli as'll open the judge's eye at the cottage flower shows, well, strike me pink. All I ask is that these young gents and ladies will bring some parsley seeds into the dream, and a penn'orth of radish seeds, and threepennyworth of onion, and I wouldn't mind going to 4p or 5p for mixed kale, only I ain't got a brown, so I don't deceive you." He doesn't have enough money for those. "And there's one thing more. You might take away the parson. I don't like things what I can see half through, so here's how." He drained a coconut shell of palm wine. So here's how. Having his drink. That's his toast. It was now past midnight, which means they reset. It was now past midnight, though it was tea time on the island. With all good wishes, the children took their leave. They also collected the clergyman and took him back to his study and his presentation clock. The phoenix kindly carried the seeds next day to the burglar and his bride, and returned with the most satisfactory news of the happy pair. "He's made a wooden spade and started on his allotment," it said, "and she is weaving him a shirt and trousers of the most radiant whiteness." The police never knew how the burglar got away. In Kentish Town Police Station, his escape is still spoken of with bated breath as the Persian mystery. As for the Reverend Septimus Blenkinsop, he felt that he had had a very insane fit indeed, and he was sure it was due to overstudy. So he planned a little dissipation and took his two maiden aunts to Paris, where they enjoyed a dazzling round of museums and picture galleries, and came back feeling that they had indeed seen life. He never told his aunts or anyone else about the marriage on the island, because no one likes it to be generally known if he has had insane fits, however interesting and unusual. There you go, and that's the end of that chapter and today's reading, but that's all right. We're doing fine. So I've actually lived in places like both of the main situations in that story. I've lived in England for 4 years, and And like I say, I lived in most of that time I lived out in the country, and it was lovely. It really was. Beautiful woods, fields, rolling fields. It's a little bit like some of the countryside in the part of New Zealand that I'm in, except that it looks a lot older and tidier because they have hedges between some of the fields. And when you drive down the road, instead of having a fence like we do, you will have hedges. Some places have fences, but mainly hedges. And so it looks a lot cooler. Really neat, actually. I love it. I'm really pleased that I actually still have friends who live in England because I like knowing that people are actually enjoying it. I just discovered that somebody else that I've got to know a little bit recently, who lives, I think, in the city or on the edge of the city, sort of like town type area. Sorry, I'm just trying to do something at the same time as talking to you. One of their favourite places to get out and go for a walk is actually in the countryside nearby. And so I've been able to see some lovely bits of video footage of where they go. It's a lot further north than what we were living, but we had other friends in that sort of an area. And so it's nice to know that others really enjoy it too. We had a wonderful opportunity being able to live out in the country. We actually lived in a farm worker's cottage. It was a modern building. It was probably built in the 1970s, and so it was brick with a tile roof. It wasn't as cold as what a beautiful old-fashioned Victorian cottage would have been, because often they're quite cold. They're a bit drafty. They don't seal well around the doors and windows quite the same way. They don't have the same level of insulation, but we lived in something that felt a lot warmer, but we looked across the field at a beautiful Victorian hung tile cottage. So that meant that the bottom half of the cottage was whitewashed brick, with paned windows and doors in it. And then the upper part of the cottage, for the wall finishing, it actually had tiles that were hung on the wall framing as a waterproof coating, and so therefore you've got this lovely red brick sort of a colour for the tiles that are there, and then it had a normal tile roof. They're special tiles that they use. Sorry, I'm just looking. This is not doing quite what I'm expecting it to on the other monitor. The connection is a little bit unstable, so I'm hoping that's not going to cause any problems. Don't think so. No, it's not saying I've dropped any frames, so that's good. Dropped frames are an indication that the connection's not doing so well or the computer's not processing so well. Yeah, so it looked gorgeous. It looked beautiful, but I wasn't living in it, and I wasn't having to maintain something that's actually a little bit harder work than just a plain brick house. So yeah, wonderful. We had a wood fire. Well, it was a wood stove, like an Aga, which is a great big cast iron and enamel wood stove, or sometimes they use diesel, sometimes they use gas. They can use coal as well, but there's something that's similar, that's a bit smaller, and it's called a Rayburn. And we had one of those. They're not as posh, but it's hooked up to the water heating system. So you have the fire going in the firebox on one side. It keeps the room that it's in warm. You can cook things in the oven that's alongside the firebox in the whole shape of it. And it's got this, what they call a water jacket, we call a wet back, which means that the back of the firebox or the side of the firebox has a section which has water in a little box that the fire is heating up, and then that water that's in that little box has pipes and it circulates up to your hot water cylinder. And it helps to keep the house a lot warmer, but it also heats your water, so you're not having to pay electricity for your water, for your hot water. That's wonderful, because a lot of your power bill is actually to do with either heating the house or to do with heating the water, a lot more than anything else that's used for electricity in the house. So we had this in the house that we were living in, and also we got firewood on the farm. It was a mixed farm, so they had some fields had crops in them like wheat, linseed, which is flax, linen flax. It was grown, it has these pale blue flowers on it, and it's grown for the seeds. I can't remember what they use the seeds for, but it was one of the crops they had one year. But they also have animals like cows and sheep on the farm. And so because you have a mixture of these things, and some of the fields have crops put in, and they have big machines that have to come in and harvest the cut the wheat off at ground level and take all the seeds out of the top of it, and the machinery for that is really big, and they want to get as much of the crop out of the paddock, the field, as possible. So they'll go right up to they'll plant it right up really close to where the hedge is, which when you're planting it, because you're using a normal tractor, isn't a problem. But when you're harvesting it, because the machine you've got has a much higher back to it, the trees, the branches of the trees that hang over the paddock, which aren't a problem when you're planting, are a problem when you're harvesting. So because they had designated that certain fields would always be used as their crop fields, they would actually prune those trees. So there were oak trees and other things like that, where they would come along and they would cut off these branches that were about this sort of thickness, cut them off so they weren't going to cause any problem for the harvesting machinery, and then take the branch that had been cut off, cut it down into reasonable lengths, and then chuck it over the hedge or put it in the base of the hedge around the edge of the field. The tree was happy. The tree was happy to keep on growing. It was healthy because it had had a branch or a couple of branches pruned off the side, and the whole of the rest of the tree that was leaning over was either in the woods, because the woods would come up to the edge of the field, or was leaning over an animal field, a paddock that you normally had cows or sheep in it. That was all still growing and doing its thing as a tree does. And so the trees were healthy, even though they'd had these pieces cut off them. It wasn't like you just sort of took all the branches off and you just left with a stick standing up. Like, no, that wouldn't have worked. But we were allowed to go out there and get all this wood and cut it up and split it and use it as our firewood for this wood stove that we had in the house. We used to use the oven for cooking. We used to use this top of the stove for cooking. It was wonderful. So that was England. We had 4 years living in a place like that. And then I have spent 4 months up in Vanuatu, which used to be New Hebrides, I think it was called. One of the tropical nations in the southwest Pacific, near New Caledonia and the Solomon Islands and Papua New Guinea, but further west than places like Fiji. And we were on a small boat, very small boat, and it was hot. It was so hot. It was lovely being in the water on the beach because it just helped you to cool down. But you would also sit in the shade on purpose because the sun made you feel so hot. And it was wonderful being up there. There were flowers growing there. We have it's called Plumeria in North America. We call it, I'm sorry, I have a terrible time with certain words. Hi, Carvey. What's it called? Anyway, a particular type of flower tree, and they use the flowers in places like Hawaii to make leis, those flower necklaces, and they use these flowers in lots of different things, but they grow just there easily with flowers all over them, and they're scruffy looking trees. In New Zealand, you either have them in the garden in a place that has no wind on them because our wind can damage them very easily, and also somewhere where it doesn't get too cold because they like growing in the tropical heat. So we've got one that's growing in a pot in our living room because our living room faces the sun, which for New Zealand, because we're in the southern hemisphere, is the north. And so if there's any sunshine, it gets it. And so it's nice and tropical warm for this plant. And we have these flowers growing. Actually, I'll just see if I can find you a picture of one. And I should be able to remember what they're called too. Yes, that's my keyboard. It's very noisy. Sorry about that. Frangipani, that's the other name for it. And this is what the flowers look like. Actually, no. Yeah, I'll go with that. I'll see if I can find what they look like when they're growing outside rather than what they look like when they're growing inside like they do in New Zealand. Not that one, that one. And I'll see if I can copy the flower picture so you can see. We have the white ones with the yellow centres, but there's a wide range. There's pinks and purples and all sorts of things. I think I'll just have to show you some flowers because I can't get you one that actually shows the trees growing well outside, which is a shame. But as a tree, they are quite scruffy. It's amazing how scruffy they look. Okay, we'll just go with the flower picture then. Copy, link address, and then we shall copy image address. That's the one. It's just going to take a moment or two before it shows up in here, just because that's the way the system works. Anyway, so we saw them all over the place. It was amazing. And knowing that we had them here, we had one here in our house back home. It was wintertime in New Zealand at the time that we were up in Vanuatu. And our one at that stage of the year in New Zealand, they are deciduous trees. They lose their leaves in winter. In the tropics, they don't really. They lose some of the leaves. They don't necessarily flower all the time up there, but they flower a lot of the time. But because they don't have the cold, they seem to cope better with the wind. So we're just waiting for this picture to be here. And yes, now I have to resize it so it's actually visible for you. These things, you'll possibly recognize them actually. Hi Squibble, how are you? Good to see you. I know I normally am reading. I've actually just finished the main part of reading, and I'm just talking about my experiences living in England and also being in the tropics. So these flowers are what we call, what did I say they were? The Americans call them Plumeria. And I told you what we call them in New Zealand. Frangipani, that's it. I have such a hard time remembering that at the moment. And so we've got these growing in we've got a tree of this growing in a pot in our living room at the moment. But you can't grow them outside in this. You can kind of grow them outside in this part of New Zealand. It's not too cold for them because I live right by the sea, and so therefore it doesn't get quite as cold. The salt of the ocean, the salt in the ocean sea, stops the temperature dropping quite as much. If I go into town, which is only like 10 minutes drive away from me, the frost that you get there in winter is a lot stronger and a lot longer and a lot colder than what we get. We will maybe get frost 2 or 3 times a year, maybe 4, sometimes a little bit more than that, but the frost won't stay on the ground any more than, once the sun's up shining on the ground, it's gone. The air is a bit cool, but that's about it. So that sort of cold kills these plants. And also we live on the ridge above the bay, and so we get a lot of wind past where our house is. Otherwise I could grow it outside. It's warm enough that I could grow it outside. But the wind that we get past our house would break it because the branches are not hard wood. They're quite soft and they split off very easily. But these grow everywhere in the tropics. These are probably the white flowers that she had in her hair in that story. That's probably what it is. So there you go. What else was I going to tell you about being in the tropics? Oh, the water. Vanuatu, the water is so clear. And because the sand is often made from ground down coral with the waves breaking against the coral reef, it makes the water look so turquoise blue. It's unbelievably blue. You see the pictures on the tourist brochures and you think, oh, that's faked. Somebody's edited that to make it look like that. And if you're around a big town and a harbour that's got lots of boats in it and there's rivers coming down into it, yeah, it does get a bit murky looking. But when you get out further away from that, the water is so clear, and the sand under the water, if it's deep enough, starts to have this turquoise shine to it. It's wonderful, and it's warm, so warm. And if you don't like the cold, like the cook in our story, remember the children said that she looked quite beautiful, quite pretty, because she doesn't have all of her normal worries. She's not worrying about feeding the children and whether she's going to get into trouble for something that they've done, which is a bit typical, but also just that life back in England is a lot harder. The nutritional level isn't necessarily great when you're living somewhere like that. Their protein is often fish-based. They're living off, a lot of people are living off the land. If they're not in the towns, if they're living out in the villages, they've got their own gardens. They will grow pawpaw, they've got coconuts, but they have to harvest the coconuts so that they can dry the coconut inner so it can be sold as copra, which is used to actually make them some money. And if you want your children to go to secondary school, you have to pay for it. Whereas if they go to primary school, which is the junior end of school, it's covered by the government costs. Thank you, Carvey. I love finding out about things. I love recognizing places I've been or somewhere that's similar to them. I got so excited the other day. I saw a picture on my computer when it started, which reminded me of a place I'd been to when I was over in Europe a few years ago. It makes it sound like we've got lots of money. We don't. We just happen to have different priorities to some people. We have really old secondhand cars. I've got all my computer is a second-hand computer, and it's an old second-hand computer, things like that. Our money goes into things like traveling when we can. That's how we do it. Anyway, so I saw this picture on my computer when it was starting up, and it reminded me of a place we'd been, and it's in Slovenia, which is part of what used to be, I think, Yugoslavia years ago. Slovenia, it's next to Croatia. If you go up the Adriatic Sea, hang on, that way. If you go up the Adriatic Sea, so you've got Italy down here, and you've got old Yugoslavia and other places like that on that side. So you've got Croatia, and then up near the very top, where you go round the top of the Adriatic Sea into Italy over here, you've got a little block of land there called Slovenia, and it backs onto Austria and I think it's Austria that it backs onto. Anyway, so it's up in the upper part of that country. It's right next to kind of the Alps, and so they've got these really dramatic hills. And when we were traveling through, because we were in a van and we were sleeping in the van on the side, not the side of the road, we'd find a bit off the side of the road that we could go and camp in the van. Anyway, so we get up in the morning, and my husband had gone off for a bit of a wander first thing in the morning, and then he comes back and he says, "Oh, put your shoes on, we're going to go for a quick walk. There's a track nearby." So I go and put my shoes on. Really basic rip-off version of low-rise, not high-rise, Converse type canvas lace-up shoes. Not supportive, not tramping shoes, not hiking boots, okay? So the first part of this track, I've since found it. The first part of this track is listed as being very easy. The second part of this track is listed as being suitable for people who have climbing and steep track training and experience. And I'm in my canvas shoes climbing up there to this waterfall, really gorgeous. And I've since found out that the gorge that goes through part of this riverway, at the time when we were there, you could actually walk along the track that goes alongside the river, and then you've got these rock walls that come down. It's a little bit like a small, narrow version of in Lord of the Rings, where they're coming down the river, and then you've got the guardians at the gates with the rocks, the rock formations on the side. It's like going into that, but a lot narrower. And it was really dramatic and quite stunning. And I've since found out that that current track that runs right alongside the river there is closed because the rock faces are actually dropping rock down onto it. So you have to go around the long way around. Anyway, so But it was marvelous, and I just had so much fun finding it on the map because I hadn't marked it at the time when we were traveling. I don't know, I don't even know why I didn't mark it on my map, but I've since found it because I've been wondering ever since then what the name of the particular place was, and I've found it. It's definitely the same one. I actually climbed up. Me and my grey hair and my canvas shoes. I climbed up from the lower part of one of the waterfalls there at the top of this track. It has a lower part and an upper part, and most people, there was a busload of tourists or something like that. They're local tourists, as in local from their own country, and they're all in hiking boots and they've got walking poles and all this sort of stuff, and I'm there in my canvas shoes, and I think I was in my skirt even. I don't know, can't remember. Might have been shorts. Nothing fancy, none of the proper gear, and they all go across, and you've got to climb across these boulders and across this little rickety bridge to get across to the bottom of these falls. And then there's a section where there's a cable, a piece of wire, fat wire, sort of like, no, probably about that thick piece of wire that you can hold on to, and you can use it to help you climb up the side of this waterfall to the halfway point. And the waterfall comes down the first part, and then there's got a little flat area there with a pool in the back of it. And then it runs from there down to the second part. And so they're all down the bottom with their fancy boots and everything, hiking poles, all looking up. And there's me and hubby up halfway up the waterfall, me and my canvas shoes. It was so funny, but it was also lots of fun. And we just happened on it in the middle of nowhere. Didn't know it was something that people went to find their way to go and have a look at or anything like that. And apparently there's people who specially go out of their way to go and look at it. There you go. There's all sorts of things that you can discover along the way. I hope you've had some really neat discoveries along the way. Life is full of discoveries if you keep your eyes open. So it's so good having you here, you guys here listening, and just chipping in with the chat as well. And I hope you've enjoyed yourselves today. And I am going to say thank you very much for being here. I think I've talked enough now. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time. I'm not sure if we're going to be finished the book next time or the one after that. I'll just have a quick look. I need to unlock it. The next chapter, just in case you need a teaser to get you back here, is called The Hole in the Carpet. That's getting scary. So we've got 3 chapters to go. We've got The Hole in the Carpet, the beginning of the end, and the end of the end. But I'm not quite sure how long those chapters are. Going by the rest of the book, I would say there's 1 day's reading on each of those. So we'll see you next time. Thank you for being in here. Lovely having you here as part of enjoying the reading. I love knowing that there are people who are enjoying it and being able to share these wonderful books and also some weirdo life experiences and all that sort of stuff. But hey, why not? Sorry, Cleo. I'm just finishing now. You'll be able to watch the VOD in a minute. But yeah, come next time. Be part of it. You're most welcome to lurk. And I say that every time, I think. I try to say that every time. I'm most happy for people to lurk and not make comments in the chat while I'm actually reading, because usually I don't actually interact with the chat while I'm specifically reading. Because it's a story, we want to keep the flow of the story. And I interrupt myself when I'm reading often enough. But anyway, that doesn't matter. We'll be here next time, 2 days from now, probably, unless there's something happens that stops it. I read Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 3 p.m. New Zealand time. And you can look that up. If you're watching this on Twitch and you go to my schedule, it will show you in your time zone when it is that I'm going to be reading. So I'll see you then, and thank you for being here. Happy reading in the meantime. Bye.